Noguchi watched in amazement as the two huge warriors fought. The broken-tusked patient was the more skillful, and was winning easily. Myriad half-thoughts ran through her mind. The patient was grateful, the other was with the killers, the broken tusk was better, older, brighter perhaps. The doctor was insane. They had to get out. Miriam stood a few meters from the battle, just stood there and watched. Noguchi ran forward, pistol ready, and grabbed the doctor by the arm. "Come on!" The monsters could slug it out to the death for all she cared. They had work to do. She and Miriam ducked through the shattered wall and ran across the compound. Noguchi steered them toward the main garage, to the east. The med center was closer to the holding pens, but they would need a flyer for what she had in mind, and the hover bike was totaled. There would be other bikes at the garage. Except Miriam can't fly, and that won't carry two people. Noguchi wanted to scream, "Fuck, fuck, fuck." And on the heels of the panic, she remembered the copter. The copter! She ran faster. Miriam had trouble keeping up. Blood ran down one of her legs. The compound was completely dark now. Many of the building lights had been broken at some point, and the few remaining only seemed to add to the shadows. A faint breeze had sprung up, hot and fetid, a death wind, full of carrion stench. Behind them and ahead, shapes moved and shrieked. It was hard to see what was happening. Noguchi guessed that the two alien races were fighting. Maybe they won't even notice us. A giant black bug leapt in front of them from a shadow and raised its strange arms to attack. Miriam screamed. Noguchi pointed and fired twice. The first shot was too high. The second tore out the bug's throat. Blood sprayed. A drop of the fluid spattered against one of Noguchi's padded suit arms and hissed, ate through the fabric and burned her skin. Acid. Some kind of acid? The noxious substance ate deep into her flesh. As they ran forward toward the garage, Noguchi felt her own blood soak into the overall. She ignored it as best she could. They were almost there. They reached the garage, Miriam now stumbling badly. Noguchi half-dragged her toward the back of the building. The copter was usually kept at the med center, on the roof's helipad. The doctors used it to get to emergencies, but Noguchi remembered that it needed some minor adjustment after the weapons collecting run. I just hope it wasn't engine trouble. Noguchi laughed sharply as she rounded the corner. A short bark of relief. It was there. She looked around for trouble, but the yard seemed clean. Miriam stumbled behind her and fell. "Oh shit, I can't get up. I'm sorry, Kaiser. I'm sorry, I can't." The doctor tried to hold it together, but she looked close to a breakdown. Her face was the color of dust, her eyes rolled upward. Noguchi pulled Miriam to her feet and dragged her to the copter. "It's okay, Miriam. You're going to be fine, okay?" She hoped she sounded soothing. "Everything will be fine, really, okay?" They reached the vehicle. She opened the door and hustled Miriam in, still talking. "Don't worry. We're going to get out of here, okay? I'll help you fly this thing. Just tell me what to do and we'll be fine." That seemed to cut through the doctor's hysteria. Revna raised her tear-stroked face to Noguchi, eyes wide. "Kazar always flew. I don't know how." Dachande didn't want to spend too much time on Tashinde. Much as he felt the idiot deserved to die slowly, he had to find the other Yautja, if there were any, find out what was going on, how he had come to this state. It did not feel good, what had happened. Tashinde fell again. His tresses were matted with thwei, two of his mandibles broken and crushed against his worthless, dying skin. Any fight the student had in him had fled. He tried to crawl away. The sight of the Yautja slowly inching from his leader was infuriating. The Quay would die as an animal, a coward, rather than go out like a warrior. Dachande waited no longer. He snatched Tashinde's bladed staff from the floor and raised it over his head, aimed it at the base of his student's upper spine, brought the sharp blade down. Shink! Dachande jerked the blade from the body in a patter of blood and then spit on the corpse. The leader donned the Quay's armor and took his weapons. He left the bandage on his chest. There was some pain there. Perhaps the dressing would help. After a second's hesitation, he pulled the recording loop from Dashinde's chest. There might be a use for it later. Armed and ready, with a fire in his gut that screamed for justice, Dachande stepped into the dark night to find the other students. Perhaps Dachinde had been alone, but he doubted it. Hunting alone was not common behavior to the young. And if they were here, in the human camp, on a hunt, Nothing would stop him from the lessons he would teach them. What? Revna nodded. He was going to teach me. Noguchi tuned her out for a second. Okay, she can't do it. We're fucked. She searched the myriad of buttons and switches on the console and found one that said main. She flipped it. The copter's engine hummed to life. She tapped her comset. This is Noguchi in copter. She looked over the board quickly. Copter 1, do you read me, tower? A hiss of static, and then Weaver's welcome voice. We copy, what's happening? Miriam, Revna and I are at the garage, and neither of us are checked out in a copter. We could use some help here. Weaver sounded calm. Okay, we got you. Hit the switch that says main. Did it. Do you see the button that says comp? Push that. Noguchi spotted it and did as she was told. A small screen flickered on with program questions. She and Revna both sighed at once. Okay, we're on a roll, Noguchi said quietly. David, get over here. Weaver's voice was distant and then came back through the comm. I'm going to let Spanner talk you up, okay? Fine. What's the situation there? Noguchi touched her arm lightly and grimaced at the pain. At least the bleeding seemed to have stopped. We're all set for your signal. Everything's locked up, for a while at least. But you should see what's happening in the southwest quad. Looks like an all-out war. Consider the signal given. Wait until we get off the ground, and then go as soon as you hear it. Good luck. Copy that, boss. There was a pause. Noguchi waited for Spanner to come on and tapped the comset. Anxious to get out of there, she turned to look at Miriam. A dark shape popped up in front of the copter, a nightmare bug. Its teeth dripped and gnashed as it plunged one claw through the windshield. Scott and Tom had stayed quiet for a long time. The sounds outside of weapons fire and death cries were incentive not to move around much. The monsters were out there, and maybe if they stayed under their rock here long enough, they'd eat each other and go away. Scott figured out that they were in the southwest quadrant of the compound, in one of the 2 empty holding pens. There were 6 others, full of bellowing rinth. Their cries mingled with the alien screams. Harmony a la hell. I'm starting to think that we were better off in the ship, Tom whispered. Yeah, right, stuck in the spider's web waiting for dinner. Their dinner. Scott cracked the door slightly to see if anyone was coming to help. So far, they had seen nothing. Well, no people. Strange humanoid creatures were at war with the bizarre animals that had taken over the ship. It was too dark to make anything out clearly, but the situation was obvious. Between the screams and the weapons, there was one fuck of a battle going on out there. They couldn't tell who was going to do what to whom and for what reasons, but it was bad. Scott was exhausted, and he felt like shit. They had been stuck there for what felt like days. He wanted a shower, a steak, a few beers, and a soft bed. No way was he going out there to get it, but it helped to take his mind off the situation at hand, which looked like Armageddon. It was all so unreal. Tom groaned softly and shifted to sit on the dirty floor. He was sick, had been coughing and having cramps for over an hour, but he was trying to keep it to himself. The look on his face expressed enough. Scott looked at his friend, worried, then back out of the bloody combat. Something screamed piercingly, and then it was silenced. Hang on, Tommy, Scott whispered. We're going to be okay. Yeah, maybe we'll sprout wings and just fly back to Earth. Noguchi jabbed her leg forward and up and pushed as hard as she could. The bug barely moved, but it was enough, maybe. She pulled the trigger 4 times, fast. The animal's head exploded, sent a spray of deadly blood across the windshield and onto the console. The noise of the gun hit her ears like hard slaps. The plexi material began to smoke immediately, and the small compartment filled with a foul and acrid stink. Noguchi whipped her head around. Nothing else coming at the moment. You okay? Revna held up one shaky hand and nodded. Noguchi took a deep breath and strapped herself into the chair. Buckle up, Miriam. She ejected the spent shells and slammed another speed loader in before she looked down at the controls and took a deep breath. Let's do it, Spanner. What's first? The copter rose in a series of sharp jerks before Noguchi turned it towards the south end of the complex. Miriam still wasn't sure what the plan was, but she felt glad to get off the ground. She felt her injured leg carefully and winced. It was a bad wound. Each second that passed left her weaker, dizzier. She had lost a lot of blood, maybe too much. Miriam applied pressure to the wound with part of her jacket and prayed silently that she and Kazar would be together soon. Deshande ran through the oddly structured system of Ooman buildings toward the sounds of battle. He ached all over, and at least 2 of his ribs were broken, but he put the pain aside for now. Shattered buildings and other rubble littered the grounds. Deshande hopped over the torso of a fallen drone. Its life fluid still hissed on the soil. He heard burners and screams in the distance, to the left. He cursed mentally and ran in that direction. The Siuit they hunted Oomans. Worse, they did so without proper surveillance. It was bad enough to have broken the law. To use poor strategy and tactics only compounded the error. The other 2 blooded must certainly be dead. They would not have allowed this. As sketchily trained as these Yapja were, the bugs would be more than just a minor challenge. Armed Oomans would be worse. A small torrent of the hard meat appeared suddenly, leapt from the dark shadows to scream at him. Deshande pulled his burner. He was in too much of a hurry for prowess feats. There were 4. They circled him. The first darted forward, teeth chittering. The outer jaws spread wide. The smaller teeth on the inner rod gaped. Deshande burned it. The hollow thump of the weapon exploded the drone's gut into bloody bits. Without turning, Deshande took out the second and the third. He shot one and used the spear in Hiju position to disembowel the other. The final drone screeched, turned and ran. Unusual behaviour, but they sometimes did that when there was a queen nearby. It was not fear, for they had none, but instinct to warn the rest. Deshande sped on. Perhaps a few of the students would be salvageable. If not, he would have to kill them. Whatever they had stepped into on this world, they had sunk up to their necks in it, and the stink was bad. Real bad. Roth loaded food and water packs into the AVs with the others. With any luck, they'd be back the next day, but they had taken almost everything. Most of the ranchers were seated and ready, just a final check and they could move. Weaver had outlined Noguchi's plan briefly. It was shaky, but there was a chance it could work. Only a few people had protested, Ackland's voice above the rest, of course, but Weaver had shut them up with a few well-chosen words. Roth had liked, or will kick your fucking ass, in particular. Roth stood outside the east lock as Weaver directed the last few people to either an AV or a ship loader. The largest piece of machinery, one of the carts that had carried most of the building supplies for the shield wall, now held 37 people. Most of the transmitting equipment was also loaded. They would continue the CDS from the desert, if they got that far. Creep whined softly at the sound of one of the children crying. He kept saying that it was too hot outside. Roth silently agreed. She was reminded of the thunderstorms in southern Texas, where she'd grown up. The stifling summer air would get even hotter as the clouds pressed down. As a child, she had waited eagerly for the first drops to fall, filled with the joy of expectation. There was a wild feeling in the air that had always made her think of carnivals in the dark, although she didn't know why. And then the rain, heavy and warm. Weaver interrupted her thoughts. "We're ready." Roth nodded and whistled for Creep to get to the bike. Kathy was watching some of the children in one of Harrison's AV. They would hook up later. A low rumble shook the ground with no warning and then grew louder. Roth hopped on a bike and started it up. The sound quickly lost in the rising tremors that beat through the soil. God damn if that didn't sound like thunder. Roth hit the accelerator and headed east, the AVs and loaders behind. Miriam opened her eyes and looked down when the noise rolled over them. There was an ocean of life directly below them. The entire compound was moving, undulating in a quake of heavy bodies and animal cries. Noguchi had stampeded the Rinth.